We are back. I'm Matt Leck. With me today is Tomas Kennedy. Tomas is an organizer, writer, immigrant from Argentina, and thorn in the side of Florida Governor Rick DeSantis. Tomas, thank you for joining us on Left Reckoning once again.
No, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So and I should just note for folks, David Griscom is traveling on family business, but he'll be with us again on Tuesday. But Tomas, who is this Rick DeSantis fella? I know that the Trump family wants to emphasize that he's poorer than Donald Trump, but also I remember him barely squeaking by Andrew Gillum in the governor's race. But give people a little bit of background about how DeSantis rose to the Florida governorship.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So he portrays himself as sort of this working class populist, and in a lot of ways, he does come from humbler backgrounds than a lot of your average politician, especially Republican politician. Definitely Donald Trump, but
Right.
he is still a Harvard, Yale educated Ivy Leaguer. He's a lawyer.
Hmm.
He you know, I think very intentionally has a career arc that tailored him to be a politician and to run for office because aside from his Ivy League credentials, he was in the military, he was in the Navy. What he mostly did in the Navy, he was actually deployed as a legal advisor
Hmm.
to SEAL teams, basically telling them, the rules of engagement and what they could or couldn't do, basically what they could get away with
Right.
while deployed in the field. He also was stationed in Guantanamo Bay, where he was also served, as a lawyer for detainees. So I'm assuming not giving them the best representation, but that's just my speculation.
That sounds like a pedigree of somebody geared toward being a Republican operative. Like all those sorts of. This is what the SEALs can get away with. That's kind of as much of a legal question. That's sort of a political question wrapped in a legal question.
Yeah, totally. And immediately after he did this military stint, he married Casey DeSantis, his wife, who is widely seen as the strategist. Actually, they are like a power duo, sort of House of Cards, if you want to get corny with it. But she was like a broadcaster from Jacksonville, and he decided to run for office for a congressional seat near Duval County in North Florida. Um, he ran in a crowded primary, is a very gerrymandered red seat, and he ran in a crowded primary. A businessman who had a bone to pick against one of the candidates in this primary gave DeSantis $1 million, and he basically sailed through the primary and became a member of Congress. And as a member of Congress, when he first got elected governor, there was a lot of people who were like, well, he's actually going to be moderate, and he's making these democratic appointments, and he talks a good game on big sugar and the environment. Maybe he'll run things from a center right perspective. But I knew that
Hmm.
wasn't going to be the case because I was very familiar with his congressional record. And this guy was one of the early members of the Freedom Caucus. And if you remember, that's the
Right.
caucus whose main goal was obstructing everything that Obama did, and to basically shut down the government any opportunity they got, and just to destroy any sort of institution and function of government, in the last 10 years. So his record in the House was as an extremist libertarian.
Right. Interesting. And then he barely squeaks by Gillum in a race which also on the ballot was the referendum to re-enfranchise felons. And that won, and also DeSantis won, which was a little bit confusing.
Yeah, and actually, before we move on, there was a recent New York Times profile on Ron DeSantis that I thought was very, very good. I don't know if you read
Hmm.
it, but it actually touches on something that is true about him. He wasn't that much of a culture warrior as a member of the House. He wasn't somebody that was constantly railing about LGBTQ issues, about trans people. He was always anti-immigrant. But and even during his first 2 years, 2018 and 2019, he wasn't seen as like a crazy culture warrior governor. That is a new development. So it's just worth pointing out how he has evolved his position as he tries to occupy the mantle of the leader of the Republican Party, and he tries to suck up all the oxygen out of the room in terms of creating like media spectacles, very similar to Trump in a lot of ways, but I think more with more strategy. But yeah, so he wins in 2018. He wins by less than 30,000 votes, less than half of a percentage point against Andrew Gillum. Same year that, as you correctly point out, Amendment 4, which restores voting rights to former felons, returning citizens, that also passes with over 60% of the vote. And that later sets a stage for another voting rights scandal that is currently unfolding that we can talk about later. But
Right.
and initially, again, a lot of people thought that he was going to be, sort of like a center right, sort of moderate governor. But those of us who were paying attention knew that that wasn't probably going to be the case. And the first thing that he did as governor, the first legislative session, was pass Senate Bill 168, which was a very anti-immigrant bill that forced local counties to sign agreements with ICE to hold immigrants past their due time for them to be picked up. It forced municipalities to comply with requests from federal immigration enforcement. Just a very anti-immigrant bill that deputized, local police to basically serve as immigration agents in the state of Florida.
Yeah, and I think the interpretation a lot of people have on that is he's trying to get his name out there for the national reactionary base of the Republican Party, right? I mean, I think that seems pretty clear.
Everything that guy does, especially since the pandemic, is
Hmm.
geared towards positioning him as the de facto leader of the Republican Party, post Trump.
Right.
And everything is geared towards him running for president in 2024. We can look at these. I'm assuming folks watching this are aware of what's currently going on their way with these flights of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, where they lied, they tricked these migrants from Venezuela into getting into these flights from Texas to Florida to Martha's Vineyard by telling them they were going to Boston, that they were going to have jobs, that they were going to have legal help, all these things, and then they just dumped them on that island with no support, no help. They had children with them, really disgusting stuff. And people keep asking me, Tomas, why would he do this? Venezuelans are a big constituency in the state of Florida. Why would he want to offend them? And I have a theory. It involves 3 points. One is they don't want to talk about abortion anymore because it's such a losing
Right.
issue for them. So they're trying to distract towards what they deem is more comfortable territory, which is immigration. But two, it's exactly what you said. He wants to stand in a primary debate stage, a Republican primary debate stage, and say, I was the most anti-immigrant. And look what I did to troll Biden. Look what I did to troll sanctuary cities. You know what I mean? Everything
Yeah.
that guy does is calculated towards his run for president because he is overconfident that he's going to get reelected.
Yeah, and I just want to play a little bit from a legal. Let's see, who is this? Miami Herald has a video from Martha's Vineyard of Massachusetts immigration attorney Rachel Self here, and I just wanted to share that with folks. Just play a little bit of this.
Was not the arrived last night make it clear that they were lied to again and again and fraudulently induced to board. Arrived last night make it clear that they were lied to again and again and fraudulently induced to board the planes. They were told there was a surprise present for them and that there would be jobs and housing awaiting for them when they arrived. This was obviously a sadistic lie. Not only did those responsible for this stunt know that there was no housing and no employment awaiting the migrants, they also very intentionally chose not to call ahead to any single office authority on Martha's Vineyard so that even the most basic human needs arrangements could be made, ensuring that no help awaited the migrants at all was the entire point.
And yeah, I mean that part is, I think, needs to be underlined, that they specifically had this entire endeavor of flying these migrants to this island and specifically did not tell them. And they later show a map that they gave them, a ridiculously useless map of United States with Martha's Vineyard. I mean, Nazi stuff, honestly. Like anybody who would do this to mock up this, like, I gotta find this map actually. This, here it is. Look, this is what they gave these folks to orientate themselves after they flew them around this ridiculous map. And I don't know what that is other than, like, fascists.
Yeah, and another part that, if you keep playing that video, she talks about how the migrants were told to basically register their address with the wrong immigration agency, basically guaranteeing, if they do so, that their asylum cases wouldn't be processed right, and therefore they would enter, proceedings for removal, for deportation. So they were setting up these folks for failure. You know what I mean? It's truly evil stuff. What's going on? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
another thing that's worth pointing out is that they're doing this with taxpayer dollars. Earlier this year, this whole thing that's happening right now in the state of Florida with these flights, the stage was set earlier this year when they passed another anti-immigrant bill, Senate Bill 1808, which was actually a response to a lawsuit that one of the nonprofit groups that I work with filed against the anti-immigrant bill that I referenced earlier. So we managed to strike down parts of the first bill. They came back at us with another bill. That bill basically, again, enhances cooperation with federal immigration agencies and local counties, but also basically that the state cannot contract transportation companies to bring migrants into the state that are pursuing asylum cases, and our shelters and nonprofit organizations are helping them through the process. They can, however, transport them out. But it's interesting because DeSantis transported immigrants into the state from Texas, right? So it would be funny to see if he violated his own law in the process. But they also allocated $12 million in the state budget to do these flights and buses to Florida. So they're spending $12 million of our tax dollars as Floridians, while we have skyrocketing rent prices, a crumbling property insurance market, a teacher shortage, an abysmal healthcare system, crumbling infrastructure, chronic flooding. This is what they choose to use $12 million, And what is it really? Not only is it cruel and mean, but it's political theater for the governor's presidential ambitions.
Yeah, and what's your sense of how it's going to play out? Because I see, certain parts of the right claiming victory, like we've all proved you wrong. But I also see a fairly strong pushback, and I think the overall logic of it just doesn't work in the reactionaries' favor. Like, the community has showed up with support for these folks, and some of them are even thankful that they were transported up there. But and also they probably are going to receive some sort of processing. That should be that should be every case, right? Like, the solution for the migration process is to expand processing and process folks quicker, not harden the border and remove folks. I mean, you can comment on anything there.
No, of course. I mean, there's been multiple studies that cite the contributions of immigrants, the fact that, they would reduce inflation, they would help address supply chain issues, they would reduce labor shortages, aside from the cultural contributions that they make. It's not all just about work. Mm-hmm. But in terms of how, I think it's interesting because during things like this, these types of scandals, I think really reveal how our politics have become a bit of a Rorschach test, where depending on your biases, you're going to see whatever you're going to see, and it's up to, organizers and communicators like us to inform people and try to make them see, our viewpoint, which we think is correct and moral, right? And I think in this case, pretty apparent for anyone decent that what they did is evil. The right is basically saying that, oh, well, if these sanctuary jurisdictions want to be sanctuary jurisdictions, they should be ready to receive these individuals. And you know what, Matt? In some way, you are right. It is better that these individuals go to these sanctuary jurisdictions instead of being here in Florida, which is an inhospitable and unwelcoming place to them. But you don't play with people's lives and do that to them while lying to them and sabotaging their immigration cases in the process. You don't do that with children. This is the so-called pro-life crowd that talks about babies, but then does that to children. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I will say also this. Today, the governor gave a press conference and they asked him about this. They asked him if there's going to be more flights. He doubled down. He said, yes, there's going to be more. I have the video on my Twitter if you want to pull it up and watch it later. But he said there's going to be more busing. There's going to be more flights. And I'm ready to spend all of those $12 million allocated for this program. And you know who was next to him while he said this? Our lieutenant governor, who is elected. We don't elect a lieutenant governor. It's part of the ticket that the governor, the gubernatorial candidates choose. He chose a state representative called Janet Nunez from Miami-Dade. It's interesting because Janet Nunez, when she was in the Florida House in 2014, sponsored a bill that would give in-state tuition for undocumented students. That means that they get to pay the same price as a U.S. citizen or U.S. resident, student in Florida. I was undocumented. I couldn't go to college for the longest time because it was so expensive. That bill benefited me and so many others. But you see her arc of turning into an anti-immigrant from those days. Why? Because she got chosen to be Ron DeSantis' lieutenant governor, and now she parrots whatever he says because she wants power and access. And I say this because, yes, a lot of people in the community are righteously outraged and standing up against this, but you do have a section of Cuban American and Venezuelan leaders who all they do is talk about communism in Cuba and Venezuela, but when it comes to actually supporting the people that are coming from those countries into the United States for a better life, they don't do anything. And in fact, in this case, they actually hinder their journey. So it's disgusting. And it is disgusting that as a Cuban American, you would stand next to this guy, hear him say this, and just nod and look at him. These people are willing to sell out their own countrymen and women, for a little bit more power and the opportunity, to have a sit in this disgusting table.
That's interesting. Yeah, the Venezuela thing, you really get a sense of how popular that is among like the South and Latin American right. We hear it from Fox News, of course, in America, but I think that's more of an echo from like Bolsonaro and people like that really like playing the Venezuela card. That's interesting. Yeah. So, do you think there's a legal response, or do you think it's going to have to be political to this DeSantis stuff?
I think both. I mean, it definitely has to be political. I mean, there has to be a strong communications response. This guy has an election in 6 weeks, right? The quickest way for us to be rid of him is not through the courts. It's, through voting him out. I'm sad to say we just have to get him out of office, and we have an opportunity to do this first week of November. And, the way we do that is by informing people what an awful job he has done, how he's not addressing any of the many problems that we have in Florida, and how everything to him is just a job interview, for his presidential ambitions. And that, involves getting through a contested Republican primary. So it's going to be a race to the gutter and a race to, far right extremism. But yeah, there is going to be a legal response. Obviously, there's problems with transporting undocumented individuals across state lines if you're not the federal government. There's problems when you have a state, government getting in the way of what is, constitutionally the federal government's job, immigration. There's problems with the state of Florida using COVID funds, $12 million worth, for this sort of political theater. You know what I mean? There's problems with them lying to people and sabotaging their immigration cases. There's liability for Florida. And there's even maybe criminal complaints that need to be filed, because you could make an argument that this is not just smuggling, transporting people across state lines, but actual trafficking. Because for there to be trafficking, there needs to be coercion, right? To trick somebody to take a
Yep.
flight, under false pretenses, that could be kidnapping. And that's exactly what they did with these people. They trafficked them. They told them, again, there's going to be jobs, there's going to be legal help, there's going to be resources. They told them they were going to Boston. And then when they got there, they dumped them with that idiotic map that you showed with children and let them out. So yeah, I think on top of everything, and aside from the humanitarian perspective, which is the biggest perspective that we should take into account, this really exposed Florida and us, the Florida taxpayers, I am a Floridian, to a whole lot of liability. So it's irresponsible, and they're not good stewards of our money in terms of tax resources.
And let's move on to two other culture war sort of trolling, and I mean worse than that. I mean, trolling makes it sound a little like there's not actual lives being affected by this stuff. But let's talk about the election police. And we already referred to that referendum that re-enfranchised, or Florida voters voted, I think, pretty solidly to re-enfranchise felons. Great vote. And what's
Florida,
the status with that?
Yeah, in Florida, to pass a ballot initiative, you have to get over 60% of the vote. So you have to get an overwhelming portion of the electorate to vote it through. So it's good you bring this up. So that amendment was supposed to basically re-enfranchise returning citizens or people with prior felony convictions that basically had served their time and who had not been convicted of murder or a sexual offense, right? So that would have benefited 1.5, well over 1.5 million people, more closer to 2 million people, right? A huge section of the Florida population that just was barred from voting, per life, because the reinstatement process was so difficult under Rick Scott. So what happened? The Florida legislature, immediately after it passes in 2018, files what they called an implementation bill, even though there was no need for it, because we, the voters, had already decided. And what did they do? They made it so these returning citizens, these people with prior felony convictions, had to pay all their fines and fees associated with their sentence. Now, what's the problem with that? It basically creates a poll tax, which is very reminiscent of what Black individuals had to go through during the Jim Crow era to get their rights reinstated. But aside from that horrible historical illusion, technically and bureaucratically speaking, it created a nightmare ordeal for these individuals to go through to get their rights reinstated, because it was very difficult, A, for them to pay their fines and fees, because just financially speaking, a lot of them didn't have the money. But B, it was very difficult for the state to tell them which fines and fees they had to pay, because remember, a lot of these folks had sentences that were not filed digitally. They were in paper records. Even if they were filed digitally, the state had no mechanism or way of accessing them, of tracking them down. So it created just a nightmare system that nobody could figure out, just a mess. Now let's fast forward to today. About 2-3 weeks ago, the governor had a press conference in Broward County, which is our most Democratic-leaning county in Florida, announcing that they had arrested about 20 individuals for illegally voting. And that was done through his election police, which is something that he established recently through a bill in the legislature. And this partisan election police basically answers to him. There's no reason for it, right? We already have a criminal unit that addresses these sorts of issues. So these 20 individuals represent such a minuscule number of the Florida electorate, which is about 11 million people, that is just on its own absurd and ridiculous that this would merit a press conference. But then people start asking questions. what is it that these people did wrong? How did they fraudulently vote? So they found out that the local supervisors of elections, in their counties, had sent them voter registration cards and had told them that they could vote. And a lot of these people thought that they were fully within their rights to cast a ballot. And then, the state basically entrapped them and criminally charged them, some with felonies, for doing something that they thought was okay. You know what I mean? And the lawyers for these individuals are very confident that these cases are going to get dropped, and again, we, the taxpayers, are going to foot the bill for this, which we should, because these individuals should not be criminally charged and they are innocent. But it is just a giant waste of resources. We should be outraged that our money is being spent this way. And again, it's a media spectacle for the governor. And it's also a little bit more sinister than that, because it's a way of going to Broward County, again, where the most Democratic voters are in the state of Florida, predominantly Black, and intimidating them, right? Intimidating these individuals, particularly returning citizens that have benefited from Amendment 4, from voting in this upcoming election that's happening in 6 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. The election police seem to me like something you create because you want to send the message that election fraud is actually a problem. And of course it's not. And like you said, like it was just almost in bureaucratic entrapment that those announcements of 20 in a population as big as Florida is absurd. Like if you want to justify election police, you better find some organization that has some way of flipping like tens of thousands of votes.
So actually, like, let's talk about that, right? Let's unpack what you just said a little bit, because first of all, one of the arguments that advocates, what we were saying while this election police bill was being deliberated, was that, when Trump won the state in 2020 by 4 points, they said Florida was, the North Star of how elections were run in the 2020 election. We had an immaculate election, right? So back then, everything was fine. But you know what? There is actual election fraud in Florida. In the villages, right? That's a Central Florida community of seniors that's predominantly Trumpian. There's a really good Chapo Trap House episode actually about the villages that folks should go listen to. About 4 or 5 individuals got caught double voting or having registrations in multiple states. In Miami-Dade County, where I reside, canvassers from the Florida Republican Party were caught going to senior centers and unwittingly changing the voter registrations of Democrats who were seniors. They were changing them to Republicans without them approving at all. And they were doing this en masse, and this later jumped out, was noticed through a special investigation done by Glenna Milberg, a great local reporter here. You know what I mean? And then what's the worst example of this is Florida Power and Light, which is our energy monopoly here, our energy utility, and More Perfect Union actually just did a video on this that I would recommend folks go check out on their Twitter. Florida Power and Light got caught funding ghost candidates, fake candidates in Florida state Senate races with the same last name or similar names as the Democratic incumbent, in an effort to and these would be NPA candidates, in an effort to confuse voters. I used to work in the Florida legislature for a guy named Jose Javier Rodriguez that just lost his election in 2020 by 34 votes. Why? They ran an NPA named Alex Rodriguez and basically pushed mailers and messaging pretending that he was a Democrat and a progressive. And this guy got 6,000 votes. You know what I mean? And later it came out that a former state senator named Frank Artiles, who resigned for using the N-word, was the one that bribed this Alex. They bribed them, this Alex Rodriguez character, to run, and they were paying his campaign mailers through a consultancy firm called Matrix LLC that was hired by FPL. And there was an email from the FPL CEO saying, "Make Jose Javier Rodriguez's life, my former boss, a living hell," because he pushed solar power options for consumers here in Florida. But and they did this in 3 state Senate races in Central Florida and in South Florida. Why? I don't want to get too into the weeds, but there's an entity called the Public Service Commission. That is the entity that regulates energy utilities in Florida. The governor appoints the members of the Public Service Commission, and the state Senate confirms them. So they never run ghost candidates in U.S. House in state House races. They run them in state Senate races because they want to, fill this commission with their cronies.
Mm.
So, but do you think you ever hear Ron DeSantis talking about the registrations that were changed by the Republican Party of Florida, or about these ghost candidates? You think the election police is focusing on that? No, they're focusing on the 20 returning citizens that thought that they could vote and didn't, and that's what they're
Wow.
they're hosting a press conference about.
That's fascinating. Okay, one final thing before we let you go. The "Don't Say Gay" bill. That's like I guess COVID was probably the big heel turn that for this new sort of edgelord DeSantis. But uh, sort of review the "Don't Say Gay" bill, and this is in the midst of Florida being having a teacher shortage. Not unique among states in that regard, but unique in the sense that I think DeSantis invited veterans to fill the roles.
Yeah. So, it's the Don't Say Gay bill. They frame it as, parental rights. But it's just red meat again to their extremist base, and it's a way of riling up, culture wars, this like, moral majority mindset, and just stoking, like fear and apprehensions of, again, parents, and what it does, the bill basically restricts conversations about LGBTQ issues and sex, by the way, from kindergarten to third grade. But they love saying that it's just from kindergarten to third grade. But there's language on the bill that also says, and whatever the Florida Department of Education, who's is led by an extremist DeSantis appointee, may deem age appropriate.
Right.
So they have the leeway to actually do whatever they want. So what has happened since then? They have banned books. They have removed materials in class like rainbows and things like that have been hanging on the walls. Just recently, the Miami-Dade School Board, which, has never been a far-right, extremist school board, they voted against establishing LGBTQ History Month in October. And again, these are not extremist members that did that. They did it because they are afraid of running against this bill. And what happens when you run against this bill? It gives the governor the power to remove you from office for not basically following state law. He did it against the state attorney, who said he would not prosecute people for violating Florida's abortion ban. He's done it against mayors, against sheriffs, against school board members in Broward. So he'll do it. I'm not excusing that political cowardice. It's just the reason. So we're actually seeing the chilling effects of this bill. You know what I mean? And they love to say,
Right.
it doesn't say anything that you can't say gay or anything like that. But that's exactly the effect of the bill. We can't even vote to establish LGBTQ History Month. And also something worth pointing out about that is that they sent the Proud Boys and Moms for Liberty and other far-right groups to that school board meeting to intimidate people, to yell at them, you know what I mean, to discourage public comment during the meeting. So you're having, these extremist people in government push these awful laws, and then they have their little like paramilitary on the ground folks who, work in synchronization with them to discourage the public from engaging. And it's very chilling.
Yeah, and I just think it needs, and for anybody on the fence, and I feel like you shouldn't be about this, but just think of like this "Don't Say Gay" stuff. First of all, kids around 6 years old or whatever, you're starting to have questions about things like that. So let's say you have a teacher who's a man who they find out is married to another man. A question says like, "Do you kiss your husband?" That would put that teacher in immediate crosshairs of state punishment, and I just don't know how people can't recognize that is extremely chilling. Not to mention, like, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard getting up in support of the Don't Say Gay stuff, saying there should be no sex education throughout high school. Even
Idiot.
it's like
Idiot.
that is absurd. You need the state. The state has a role in explaining a lot of these things for kids because one, it arms the kids against abuse because you know what is sort of allowed in a sort of personal space issue, and they might not get that from extremely religious households, which is part of who, or mainly who, this is delivering for, is people that think you shouldn't teach any sex ed at all. But now it's just, oh, we shouldn't. Uh, the characterizations are so homophobic, like as if teachers are
Horrible.
doing stuff in class that is, I don't know.
Yeah, look,
It's
and
really upsetting.
I'm not gonna modulate my opinion on this because I just find it gross. Like I don't give a shit. Like gay people are real, trans people are
Mhm.
real, and I was at CPAC, basically just trolling and like trying to bother Marco Rubio. Whatever, different story. But a far right influencer saw me and put a camera on my face and was like, "What? You think that we should be teaching first graders in kindergartens, about LGBTQ stuff, about trans ideology?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so, because you know what? That's like a fact of life. I'm not,
Yep.
like it's just a reality. These are real people, and what we have books at that level that show hetero couples that there's
Yep.
love stories that are age appropriate, but they're love stories. Why
Yep.
can't we show two men or two women falling in love?
Yeah. Well, and they don't understand. They think that's just being neutral, but no. When you're saying that's not appropriate for school, you're making an ideological claim about gay people or trans people. You're saying that there might be something wrong here. That's a message that schools absolutely cannot send.
Yeah, any Disney movie that you would show to your 6-year-old, think about Snow White or whatever. That's like,
Yeah.
there's a hetero couple in there. I really don't see the big fucking deal with having it be a homosexual couple. And if you have a
Exactly.
problem with that, you're a homophobe.
Yeah, and you know what? I think most people don't. I think if the Republicans, I think this, like we said, like I think this is a guy who's trying to distract from all this bullshit. Like this whole Martha Vineyard stunt. First of all, Abbott had been doing that in Texas, is my understanding. I think he did it up to DC, right? And so DeSantis is just like, oh, my election police, that stuff, and my don't say gay stuff, I'm actually not going to be able to run on that. Well, let's figure out something else. And it's just a guy throwing shit against the wall, and it's the most cruel shit there is. But that's Ron DeSantis.
Yeah,
Tomas Kennedy, you got to find a word there.
No, I was just gonna say, he has taken a page out of the Trump playbook for politics, which is to constantly occupy, the public sphere, to suck up the oxygen out of the room. And Trump, I hate him. I think he's a piece of shit, but he was a good showman. He's an entertainer. DeSantis is not. He doesn't have that swag, right? So he needs to occupy the public sphere through different means, and it's basically through creating controversy and stoking these culture wars day in and day out. And that's the sad state that we find ourselves in Florida.
It's very sad. Well, Tomas Kennedy, people follow him at TOMASKENN, Substack, that same TOMASKENN.substack.com. Thanks so much, Tomas.
No, thank you for the invite. Talk soon.